So, hi everyone, I'm Janelle Estes, Chief Insights Officer at User Testing.
And I'm Andy McMillan, CEO at User Testing.
And today we're very excited to have Karthik Suresh, co founder and Chief Technology Officer of Ignition, on the show. Ignition is a collaborative hub for product teams to plan, execute, and measure the go to market side of launching a product. Thanks so much for joining us today, Karthik, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited.
Great. Well, like everyone else, I bet you're feeling the impacts from inflation, higher gas prices, and really just generally some concern around the economy. We recently actually released some new test plan templates within user testing that enables our customers to better understand what their customers need, expect, what their perceptions are around inflation, and even new products or offerings that they might be, putting out into the market. And we have a segment on our show called the Insight segment,
hmm
and we actually used one of those templates to ask our contributors at user testing, who happen to be moms, how inflation is affecting them. And so I'd love for us to watch this together, listen together, and talk about what we heard.
Just the inflation on gas alone affects my day to day going to and from work. And just, I have 3 children, feeding my children. Like, it's been tough. Like, just the cost of food and gas, like, not on housing. My rent's gone up like so much. Taxes have gone up so much. It's been really, really trying, and we've been struggling to get by for the first time in 5 years. So it's been rough.
It just has affected my day-to-day life extremely because I feel like I'm, living like from paycheck to paycheck, which, nobody wants to do.
Everything that we're seeing right now is affecting everybody, but the food prices, the gas prices are the top ones that I'm most concerned about.
My shopping is now looking more at what's on sale, what is available, because there is less available, and what can I stretch further.
Because I think if you can get more bang for your buck, especially now, I think that's more enticing for people, especially for me.
When it comes to shopping habits, as far as going into physical stores, we are now doing more online to save on the gas costs and stuff. So we're not going into physical stores as much as we used to go into the physical store. So that's how it's affected that and how we shop. So it's affected how we shop more and the amount of we shop.
I would still buy the things that I would need, of course, but I just try to cut down on some of the things that I want versus what I need. So like the things I actually need, I would actually, get. But I wouldn't as, splurge as much as I used to.
Like, I love going to Target and getting books. I'm going to have to do that less. So it is going to impact how I engage or do business with Target because I'm not able to do that as much. I'm not able to do that with Amazon as much. I'm not able to go out and try new stores that I haven't been able to try yet because I'm going to have to be careful with what I'm spending and how I'm doing it.
Because some companies will take advantage of this and hijack the process way more than what they should. And this, to me, is a definite no-no for a company.
I just want to feel like that business or organization is for me and is actually showing ways that they are concerned for our economy and what's going on these days. So I just feel like what would make me more likely to engage with them is that showing that they care, honestly.
So I thought that was really impactful. I was fascinated actually by the person who mentioned that they're now using all online sources to get their food and groceries because they don't want to pay for the gas
I
to get
guess,
to
yeah.
and from the store. I didn't even go there. I was actually quite surprised by that, but I guess thinking on it, it sounds pretty straightforward. As a dad and a co-founder yourself, how did these messages resonate with you?
Oh yeah, that's definitely very impactful. And personally, yeah. So I'm a co-founder. At the same time, I have two daughters, 4 and 2, and inflation has definitely affected us all in different ways. For me, from a personal side of things, yeah, gas is probably the most impactful. Like, I think we have kind of reduced our travel plans for the summer, and also in general, the rents are going up. The childcare is going up, and day to day, in addition to the basic needs, I think everything is going up, and it especially impacts us as a family because as a founder of a startup, you don't take a lot of cash out of the company. So you basically, it's all about equity here. But then now we are forced to like decide like how much we really, want to take out of the company because everything is very expensive. Um, but also I mean, if you take a step back, I mean, it's basically like we just went from a period of excess to a sudden shock. And there was a time just 6 months ago when Fed was printing money and there was so much capital and liquidity in the market. Startups were getting funded at ridiculous valuations, and then just in like in 6 months, like boom, like now the liquidity is gone, the inflation is up, the war is such a big wild card, nobody knows what's going to happen. There's no more subsidies, so it's more than like a slow increase in inflation or something. It's not like this is something which people expected. I remember like me talking to my co-founder way back in December saying, hey, I know things are heated up right now, but I don't think anything's going to crash in the next maybe couple of years. Maybe it's like 2024 might be a recession, but like boom, in just Q1 of this year, we had this like a huge crash, not just in the markets, but primarily driven by both oil prices and also food prices. So yeah, this is definitely a huge shock. But having said that, I do think by the end of the year or early next year, we would be in a different place. Unfortunately, that's going to come at a cost. I mean, if you see what's happening today, the inventories are increasing, the demand is definitely decreasing. You can see the people who said that they're not even trying to go to the retail store, so retail is going to get crushed. And then that which means they're going to make less money, which means unemployment is going to go up. So eventually, inflation, I think, will come on, which will be controlled, but it's going to come at a cost. To especially, it's going to hurt the people who, on the lower income side of things, and that's just the reality we are in. I mean, I think that we are already in the recession, but yeah, that's a sad reality.
Yeah, I think that's right, Karthik. You could certainly also sort of feel it in those answers. I mean, there were a couple folks that sort of paused before they started speaking. It sort of really conveyed that impact. I thought it was interesting. One of the participants in the video talked about sort of observing how companies also react. I mean, she sort of had this feeling of like, we're having to deal with this. One participant talked how they might shop more online because they don't want to spend the money to drive to the store. So that was interesting. And then another participant said, the contributor talked about how, some companies will use this as an excuse to raise their prices too much. And I thought that was really interesting, just sort of, maybe obvious, but to really hear consumers talking about the impact to their families, but then also sort of how they're observing what brands and companies and stores that they work with do. That sort of, to me, really highlighted, regardless of what these companies decide to do, how they communicate those decisions will be really important. Like I know for a while airlines at one point were communicating it's the higher fuel prices is why we're doing this. And as a consumer, you can sort of agree or disagree, but at least you had some context as to why they're doing that. So I thought that was really interesting as well. Just sort of the idea of how are you engaging your customer on such a challenging issue, I thought was sort of fascinating.
Yeah, for sure. And you can see not just the customers, you can see like even in the valley, the companies are really like trimming the workforce. There are so many layoffs here happening. So in the short term, I think there is going to be a lot of pain. And yeah, it's very important that you communicate that well to the customers. And also what's happening is like everyone, like for example, I'm in the startup plan, all our investors, Sequoia, YC, everyone's sending out memos saying, hey, you need to survive this, you need to cut, even if you have money in the bank, you need to be conservative. So there's almost like a group thinking going on where everyone is like, even if, for example, if there's a company doing well and they don't cut, people will be like questioning. It's like, hey, what are you doing? We are in a recession, so you need to cut. So I think the short term, there's going to be a ton of pain, and they really have to manage the communication right, unfortunately. But again, I guess what's probably going to happen in the longer term is like, let's say, when they all increase the prices, the demand is going to significantly go down, and they're all going to be stuck with, if we just talk about Walmart and Target, as an example, you can see that I think that they have one of the highest increases in their inventories in decades. So eventually they have to cut down the prices to, kind of get rid of that. So I think it's going to get better, but it's going to get worse first. So I think it's going to get worse. And then, yeah, everyone's going to go through so it's almost like the trough, and go through a round of suffering, and then it's going to get better. So in the next few months, how people manage the perceptions, how the companies can communicate to their customers, and also how the customers can actually deal with this. Especially families, for example, is going to be definitely definitely a challenging time.
Awesome, thank you. I'm sure we could talk about that topic for a while, but that's not why you're joining us today. As I mentioned, Ignition helps product and marketing teams successfully launch products. So can you tell us a little bit more about that, your company, yourself, and I guess maybe even what's keeping you up at night?
Yeah. Yeah, just to maybe start with my own background. I have a tech background. I started my career in high frequency and algo trading space in New York. I did that for about 7 years before I realized I didn't want to be in financial services for the rest of my life. Then went to business school, and after in London, and after business school, I wanted to get into tech and specifically startups. Initially, co-founded a company in fintech space. Did it for about a year, but that did not do well. Then joined another company called Craft as a second employee, and I was there with them for till Series A. So basically, went through the whole process of finding product market fit and eventually scaling the team. Then I joined Facebook as a PM. I was a PM on the Facebook app and then on Facebook Reality Labs. So got a chance to understand how products are built at like much later stage companies and public companies. And then while at Facebook, I met my co-founder Derek, who used to run product marketing for Rippling, through this community called On Deck. Then we started brainstorming some ideas, and one thing which was obvious to us was like, there's so many tools to help engineers. There's so many tools to help like product managers, like this product board, and the road monk and product plan, and there are so many tools, but there's no tools for product marketers or for go to market process in general. And at Facebook, for example, I was involved in several launches. Like, we launched Oculus referrals, we launched, the Ray-Ban Stories product, and it was managed from a spreadsheet which had like 100 tabs. And there was a tab to keep track of other tabs. And so this is clearly a pain point, but nobody knew where the latest assets was. Like nobody knew where the latest logo was. And you have to educate the whole marketing team, the partnerships team, and you need to message it to the execs, to different orgs. And that was a super painful thing to kind of go through it. And the way it was done was like you basically had a war room every day where like 50 people would join this war room, and they would literally like some kind of like a project manager would go through a spreadsheet and just, hey, is this done? Is this done? Are we on track? And literally check the rows in the sheet. So, and whether it was Facebook or it was an early stage company, like Craft, the launch planning was always a pain, and there was no tools to help you automate a lot of that, and which is how Ignition was born.
It's awesome. It's a great founding story, and I think you're right on with the pain points. I mean, I started my career actually as a developer, but then came up through the product management ranks at both small companies and large companies, and the pain points that you speak of, they really resonate with me. And you put so much time and effort into building a product and into launching a product. Part of a big part of our topic today is like, why do product launches succeed or fail. I mean, all that effort, all that intuition about customers and goals in the market and the marketing and everything, and then sometimes they just don't work. And so I think to set up this conversation, we're going to talk about product launches, but what we did was actually ran another user testing study and collected a highlight reel of some product leaders talking to us about why product launches sometimes fail. So let's take a moment here and hear what they had to say.
In your experience, what are the top reasons product launches fail? Yes. So if a support team is not aware that there's a new product launch that's happening, or sales don't know what they're selling, or don't understand what they're selling, customers are not primed to know that this is coming, that the development team is not available for any hypercare or supporting the support team. This is where product launches will fail.
And if people don't have the key messages, the storytelling, the value, and something else, and some process that gets them bought into it and excited about it and willing to try it, versus falling back to their old habits and just thinking, oh, my old habits are easier, it's dead. And I've had that happen quite a few times. Like, that's been a pretty solid lesson.
I think going back, people not holding up their end of the bargain. So if they have tasks assigned to them not getting their tasks done in time, or they underestimated how much it's going to take for them to do, or what their capacity is going to be. So I think people not being realistic with their timelines is usually a big reason why I've seen things fail. I mean, usually we get things out the door, but
I would say inconsistency, ineffective marketing, and maybe even a lack of communication among teams internally.
The worst ones you can have is where the wrong product has been launched, which is like it didn't have any of the features or requirements or anything that the customer really needs, and basically it's like you're throwing a product there that was doomed to fail from the beginning because you spec'd out you built the wrong product. So that to me is the worst possible expectation, where you launch a product that nobody wanted.
Again, going back to my first point, you may just miss actually the point. You might think that you know your users, that you know what their problem are, that you know like what you're trying to do, and just getting lost in, oh, I have a solution, I have an idea in mind, a feature, let me put it out there, I'm sure they will love it, when actually maybe your customer don't need it. So I think just having an idea and not testing it, no matter like big or small or anything, like there's always feedback, there's always iteration that you can do before going to market with it. So I think that will be the first problem.
All right, so Karthik, I think lots of interesting points made in the video. I don't know if you had the same sort of empathetic reaction to these product leaders that I did, having been through these kind of processes. But what were your takeaways from the video?
Yeah, it's so great to see the exact kind of problems like we are going after being mentioned in that video. It's great to see that the validation, but the problems are painful. So, for example, the first person talked about like how when you launch a product, like salespeople sometimes don't know what's going on. Customer support has no idea how to support this new feature, and then so you have not really messaged all the key stakeholders, and you just done a launch. And then, typically like your engineering team or product team is like, your launch is just when it gets deployed to production. And then you go party, right? But then it's actually the beginning of a launch process where so many things have to happen. And you can see that pain literally come across in that video. It's basically, it was also good to see people talk about, communication, internal communication between various teams. And also making sure you're launching something with the features that customers actually want. And also like, I think the last person talked about like just losing track of the problem and just trying to push your own solution or idea. But in general, I think there was like a lot of like key themes around basically communicating to the internal stakeholders and lack of communication and having a process around a launch, which is like the key as to like why product launches fail.
I have to say, when I was listening to that video, or when I was watching those contributors comment on why product launches fail sometimes, it felt like a lot of blaming. Like it felt like a lot of like, oh, well, support didn't come along with the process and the marketing team, and I don't know, like, is that a raw, like, did you see that at all? I guess I can't I mean, I can empathize with what they're saying, but since I've never run a product before, maybe I might have a different perspective.
Yeah, I think this is like way too common. It's when they talk about this is something which I actually can relate to closely, even at Craft or at Facebook. And all the times, for example, one thing I keep hearing in the marketing teams is like, hey, the engineering team doesn't really update me on when things are going to ship, and we have this huge PR campaign which is planned for next week, and then just a week before, the engineering team is saying that, hey, sorry, the launch is delayed for 2 weeks. And then marketing team is like, hey, why didn't you tell me before? And the engineering team is like, hey, it's not a big deal. I mean, it's just a week. But this is to understand like how much of the work which goes on in actually setting up this messaging and the processes and reaching out to the public relations firm. So I think just being able to empathize and understand like how intensive this whole go-to-market process is across the company will be a good start. And that's basically one of the pain points which kind of came across. But also just to like talk about in just my own opinion on product launches in general and some of the mistakes which people make is like you know basically like sending an email is not a launch. Like a lot of the places you just launch, you deploy your latest feature or release to production, and then you send out an email and then say, hey, the launch is done. But that's not a launch. You need to have a process. You need to have a process where you need to figure out, like, you need to have a tiered process. For example, when you're launching a major project, it's a tier one launch. If it's a minor feature, it's a tier three launch. So a tier three launch could just be an email, maybe you update a blog, you update some FAQ. But for a tier one launch, you're going through the entire launch process where you're thinking about everything from who you're targeting, what's your persona, what's the messaging, how do you plan to position this in the market so that people actually understand the value prop. Like, why should I use it? Okay, great, you launch this new feature, but why does it add value? And then what channel should I use? If you're just sending an email, email open rates are pretty low. So you really need like a multi-channel approach to introduce products to people. And then, so all of these actually takes time. And the other mistake I keep seeing is like people, they don't understand the objective. Let's say you are creating a new product, and let's say you're creating a new category of products. If you invest in SEO, it's not going to help because nobody's searching for your product. It's a new category. So you need to invest in like content marketing versus if you're launching in a very competitive space, then the best way to do it is just go after your competitors' customers and then maybe offer them huge discounts. So really try to understand like how do you actually bring this product or even a feature to the market, and having a process around it and communicating this to all the stakeholders internally is so key. And a lot of companies don't do it well, and that's why product launches fail.
I think that's exactly right, Karthik. I'd also say my experience is that one of the hardest parts about being a product manager at any kind of scale is, you're responsible for everything but in charge of nothing. So if the support team, if 99% of their current tickets are the current product and you're launching a new product and they don't want to spend any time getting up to speed on the new product because it's not most of their tickets, there's not a lot you can do about it other than trying to drive that alignment. And you talked a lot about like before you launch, or part of the launch, how do you have all that alignment? A part of it is it's just buy-in and understanding and focus. And I definitely think that sort of came through in the videos, where people are just sort of like, this team wasn't on board, or this team didn't get weird, and it's really hard. It's sort of an innovator's dilemma with a new product launch in a lot of roles where they're mostly dealing with the existing product or the existing set of features. So I think that's right. It did make me wonder, as I sort of preface with like at some level of size that gets harder, do you think this changes quite a bit, this sort of alignment issue or the product launch reasons for success or failure based on maybe the size of the company? Like, is it different things that make product launches fail at small companies versus big companies? Or perhaps the business model, the one that comes to mind for me is maybe the difference between sort of a consumer-centric business, like a B2C business, or a B2B business where you're selling to another business. Do you think those are different reasons that product launches fail based on the size of the company or sort of what industry they're focused on?
Yeah, I think those factors definitely have an impact. I mean, the fundamental process or a go-to-market plan is the same, whether it's a large or small company or a B2C or B2B. But then, for example, let's talk about the size of the business, right? So in larger companies, they do have a process. They do have a dedicated go-to-market team. They do have like product marketing managers running a launch process and then investing in like, basically coming up with marketing assets and messaging. But the biggest problem there is just stakeholder alignment. It's like not everyone's aligned on the messaging. Not everyone knows what's happening when a product is launching and how to sell that product or communicate the value prop of the product. So that's like the biggest issue in a large company. In a smaller company, the issue is there is no process. It's almost like you're so tied up in terms of resources. Like, do you really want to spend time in actually coming up with a launch process? And and also people sometimes don't have that skill to actually take a product to the market. Most of the efforts in the early stage companies are focused on engineering efforts, just building the product, making sure there's no UX issues, there's no bugs, there's stable versus like actually thinking about, okay, how do I actually position this product? How do I message it to my customers? How do I reach my customers? So I don't think there's enough investment in the process to begin with. So that's the issue in earlier stage companies or smaller companies. Um, Now coming to the business model side of things, when consumer centric or business centric, there I think still the fundamental, thinking about like who's your persona, who's your ideal customer profile, how do you message a value prop, how do you position it, what does the market look like? All of that is exactly the same, but then the channels you use to actually onboard and acquire customers are very different. So you need to think about what you're investing in. Maybe on the B2B side, you probably have a sales-led motion or a product-led motion. And then on the consumer, it's like a very different way of getting your users onboarded and acquired and onboarded. So that's where a lot of the issues occur. But yeah, I mean, I think the fundamental go-to-market process or a go-to-market strategy and plan, the various components are pretty much the same. But then there are very specific problems when depending on the size of the business model.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's certainly considerations for the size of the business model itself. But you did just mention that there's sort of common elements that are important in any sort of go-to-market plan, regardless of size or business model. So can you talk a little bit about that? What are some of the key elements in a go-to-market plan?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. And so when you first think about launch planning or a go-to-market plan, the very first thing you want to do is like, hey, what are my objectives? What are the KPIs for the launch? We talked about, is your objective are you creating a new category or are you entering a competitive market? And then what are your KPIs? So very clearly defining objectives and KPIs for the launch. What constitutes success? That's kind of where you begin with. Then you go into the target audience. Like basically in target audience, the first thing you need to do is think about who is your ideal customer profile. That's basically defining the kind of companies you're going to go after. Talking more from an enterprise, client's perspective. And then the buyer persona. Is it like a PM? Is it a PMM? Like what is the buyer persona within those companies? So and then defining that persona is pretty critical. And then a lot of the times there's a lot of confusion in the go-to-market side of things is because the different members of the sales team, they're not very clear as to like who they are actually like going after and pitching to, especially when there's a new product or a feature. So clearly defining the persona is important. The next step is like thinking of, Andy, so you had a question.
No, I was just gonna jump in and ask. I feel like defining personas is really important. We heard one of the contributors in the videos just sort of reminded me towards the end, talked about alignment with the actual need of the product. And so I think we sort of started with some of the videos saying, it wasn't aligned with support or I wasn't aligned with marketing. But towards the end, someone said, sometimes these product launches just aren't connected with what the ultimate need actually was of the user. There are things that you've seen products teams do to think about that, and that need being maybe the product defined broadly, not just the widget that's being built, but the service, the marketing, everything around it. I just thought that was an interesting observation when he talked about the buyer persona. It sort of, to me, sort of reconnected in my head that comment from the video.
Yeah. Exactly. It's so critical that you you really understand the buyer persona and the pain points, because only when you do that, then the next step of the go-to-market plan is like trying to figure out the messaging. Like, how do you message it to the users so that they understand the value prop? It's like, okay, you built this cool feature, so what? Like, how does it solve my problem? Like, and how is it different from the solution I'm using it? And that's where positioning comes into play. Like, how are you positioning your product? It's not just this new Coke, which just like, one of the famous products which failed. Really thinking about like how exactly are you positioning your product? Are you doing like a price-based positioning? Are you being like a value-based positioning? Like really thinking about what's the message and how you're going to help differentiate your product from the rest of the competitors, and that's going to be critical. So that's the next part of the go-to-market plan. So once you're done with the messaging and positioning, then you need to think about what channels you're going to use to reach those persona, right? So what channels you're going to use, and obviously, it shouldn't just be like one channel. Hopefully you have multiple channels in mind, a combination of like emails and digital marketing and ads and SEO. So what kind of channels, what is the channel mix you're going to use to actually reach the customer? Then once you decide on the channels, then you need to work with the marketing ops team and designers to actually come up with marketing collateral, copies and assets, and generate all of that. Then you need to, and then depending on the type of the company, you need to train your salespeople. So generate sales enablement material. You need to train your customer support, customer success people. So you need to have like webinars to train all of them, and you need to have a lot of material to actually train them about the feature which is going to be launched. And then finally, you have a launch day where you have your whole launch day checklist, where you basically run a checklist to make sure the engineering is ready, the marketing is ready, the sales is ready, the execs have signed off on the messaging. They make sure that, and then the legal and privacy and other folks in the company have also been kind of signed off on the messaging and the launch as a whole. So there's a whole launch day checklist you need to put together. And then finally, there's the stakeholder management we talked about. Making sure you message the same thing at various levels, to the execs, to the salespeople, to your customers, to engineering team, to marketing team. Just make sure everyone's on the same page before you hit the go live button on your launch, right? So all of these actually is basically like a go-to-market plan. So which basically requires significant investment upfront, which a lot of companies miss, and the people who do it right are the ones which really succeed.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And when you say it, out loud like that, and all those important elements, it really does track. And I love the balance of internal alignment along with, really understanding who your customers are. When you talk about a channel plan, for example, like you can't just build that in isolation without understanding where are your customers, what channels are they using today. And so I think a really nice call out to balancing both of those things. So I have to ask you, given your background at Facebook and now Meta, what are your thoughts on the metaverse and the launch of the metaverse? Like, does that classify as a good product launch? Was that a success? Is it a success?
Oh yeah, that's probably you could have an entire conversation or podcast just on that topic. That's definitely a loaded question. Just just to talk about metaverse, I know people have mixed feelings, and right now the stock is not doing well, but I'm a huge fan of the metaverse personally, and especially COVID has accelerated this whole move to the metaverse. I can talk about Ignition, for example. Ignition, we are a fully remote distributed company. Most of our team members are in different locations and different geographies and across different continents. And we use this software called Gather.town, which is an office, like it's like a metaverse for office space. And you can actually see everyone's avatar sitting next to each other, and you can walk to the other person to just initiate a conversation. And that has significantly improved our productivity as a remote company. So you can see those metaverse applications in real life right now happening. And I only think it's only going to accelerate. Also, when you talk about metaverse, there's so many different initiatives. There's the whole gaming side of things, which is like a separate category. And then there's like workforce for metaverse, and then there's events, which is another huge application. So it's gaming, and then the whole Web3, which is basically enabling a lot of the infrastructure to the move to the metaverse, where the incentive models are going to be very different. And I was in Facebook Reality Labs, and Definitely, I would say the adoption is still slower. It's not. It's probably a minor. Like you, Facebook has like billions of people, but Oculus probably have a few million people using that. But I think it's just a matter of time before the metaverse finds its application in large numbers across various use cases. Again, I can go into each of these use cases in depth, but that would probably be, a separate podcast on its own.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's a loaded question. You handled it well. I know you weren't really expecting that one. Hey, so we're gonna move over to the lightning questions. So these are questions that we ask every guest that comes on the podcast. So first one is, what's a book that you've read recently that you'd recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, I was reading this book just last week called Build by Tony Fadell, and it's basically, there's a guy who was a founder of Nest and got acquired by Google, and he talks about everything about building a company, not just building products, but also like running teams, recruiting, going through acquisition, and that was just fascinating. That's just definitely a fascinating read, and I highly recommend this book.
Yeah, I love it. I love the subtitle, An Unorthodox Guide to Making Things Worth Making. Huh, that's awesome. Yeah, I'll have to check that out. All right, next question for you. What's one piece of advice that you would give to someone trying to convince others to invest in customer feedback?
Yeah, I mean, for me, this seems like common sense. It's like you're building a product for your customers, and if you don't get their feedback, then what are you really building? But then on the other side, I mean, I've interviewed so many product managers where they have never talked to a single customer. And I think there's a whole process, like maybe introduce a lot of friction, and or maybe people rely too much on data and analytics versus actually, soliciting feedback. So it's almost like an irony in my mind. So when I talk to people, it's like, let's say even you're using analytics for your product, they'll tell you what, but they'll never tell you why. You really need to know why only by getting the feedback directly from the customers. And that's why you need to like go and talk to your customers and get the feedback from them. Only then you can actually build a product which is actually going to solve the pain point which they are hiring your product to solve.
Yeah, absolutely. You're speaking our language, Karthik. So when you think of the future of product, what are you most excited about?
Oh yeah, I'm a huge product buff. I'm excited about so many things. Again, this is again I could talk a lot of I can go on and on about this question, but one of the things I'm most excited about is like the pace of the pace and the acceleration of innovation, and the pace at which the new technologies are being built. We just talked about metaverse in this podcast as well. Like when I was growing up, I didn't have a laptop. I just had access to a desktop computer, and I had a dial-up broadband internet. I had to use my phone to connect. And if somebody told me that in another 10 years you would have like a self-driving car or an AI model which just writes content on its own, or a space or a rocket which lands itself, back on Earth, I would be like, oh, it's probably 100 years away, or at least 50 to 60 years away. And here we are just like 10, 12 years from that time where, like 15 years from that time where, all of this is happening. So the most exciting thing about the future of product is the pace of innovation, the acceleration. And, it's just, even in larger companies, you see that like there's less of inertia. People are more open to change. The leadership is pushing for a culture of change and innovation. And that's the most exciting part. And I just can't wait to see what the next 10 years is going to bring.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's amazing how much things have changed in the last couple of decades. I too can relate or remember the days of dial-up and just a desktop computer and a laptop. So it is crazy what we're seeing around us in that short period of time. So thank you so much for joining us today. I really enjoyed our conversation. And for listeners out there, if you want to watch the videos from today's episode, you can head on over to our show notes. We also have videos where we asked product leaders if they think it is easier to launch a product today compared to 5 years ago, and what they believe the ingredients are to a successful product launch. So lots more goodies over there. Karthik, how can people learn more about you and Ignition?
Yeah, our website is haveignition.com. It's HAVEIGNITION.com, and that's our website. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn. It's Karthik Suresh LBS, or Twitter Karthik Suresh, first name last name. That's my handle. Yeah, thanks a lot for having me on the show. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Awesome. Thanks so much.